Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 19th of September 2024. This is a Geopolitics video and I didn't do one of these yesterday, and so that I've got quite a lot of content. I'll have to, again, rush through it. We're going to start with good news within the EU. Now, this is on the back of, or not on the back of this, I guess is a precursor to the announcement today of 160 million euros going towards helping out in winter and energy, etc., etc. So, and that's coming from frozen Russian assets, I believe. So, EU is I think doing what it should do at the moment. It is supporting Ukraine as much as possible, and the important point that I'm going to make now is that the right people appear to be getting in the right places. So Ursula von der Leyen has been re-elected. She's strong on support for Ukraine. Here, Kiev Post says, tired of waiting on the increasingly appeasing attitude towards Russia's global terrorism from some Western countries, and the implication here is the US, Europe's Russia hawks. Hawk is sometimes a pejorative, but I think here it means people who are going to be strong on Russia. Europe's Russia hawks move into prominent positions of power within the EU. So you've got Kaja Kallas there, who was a former Estonian premier, now in position in, I think she replacing Joseph Borrell. So most prominent is Estonia's ex-Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, who was tapped by EU leaders to be the bloc's new top diplomat for the next 5 years. Set to work closely alongside her, von der Leyen on Tuesday named another Baltic former premier, Lithuania's Andrius Kubilius, to a new post aimed at bolstering the EU's defence industry. On top of that, Finland's candidate scooped a broad role handling security, while Latvia's pick got an economy role and Poland laid its hands on a budget, all subject to EU Parliament confirmation in weeks ahead. Quote, I would say it's not a power shift, rather more power balance, the diplomat from Eastern Europe told AFP. So it's really good news that you've got these prominent Eastern European politicians moving into positions of power within the EU that are much more likely to support Ukraine. So you've got some structural support going in place for Ukraine, rather than, dipping into some of the fringe coalitions on the right with, Fidesz party of Hungary and Smer's party of Slovakia, etc., etc. So I think this is really good news. Now, the new EU defence minister says peace can be achieved only if Ukraine wins and restores its territorial sovereignty. So, again, strong positioning, strong rhetoric. EU appointed its first ever defence commissioner, Andrius Kubilius, who we just heard about, on the 17th of September 2024. So he's sounding strong. This is really good news, moving in the right direction. Now, to go to the subject that I talked about with Talaria, go and check out the live stream that we did discussing how Russia is not a genuine member of the UN Security Council, even though they might appear to be on paper. They are not. They have no right to be there. Based on a kind of historical analysis of how they came to be there. Alexander Stubb said, so the Finnish premier said, reform of the UN Security Council should include expanding its membership, removing the veto power of any state, and expelling any member involved in an illegal war. So he's looking to remove Russia, although not due to the reasons of them not having a right of being there, but actually because they have become embroiled in an illegal war of their own making, and that does not sit well with being a permanent member of the Security Council, UN Security Council. So Finnish president wants Russia excluded from UN Security Council. He's abolishing single-member veto rights, booting out Russia, and that was reported yesterday. According to Stubb, any council member engaged in a legal war such as Russia is in right now in Ukraine should be suspended. Absolutely agree to that. No problem with that. Poland may use its EU presidency to increase pressure on Ukraine over the Volyn tragedy. So the Volyn tragedy is this massacre that took place in the 1940s during the Second World War that involved Ukrainians, with the support of the Germans, I take, massacring a load of Poles, and it does date back to kind of prior to the Second World War, and I don't want to get into the Volyn tragedy now. Suffice to say, there is a tragedy where Ukrainians were responsible for killing an awful lot of Poles. Now, the Polish, this is still in fairly recent history, right? So the 1940s, this is still an issue in Poland. At the last meeting, Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski persuaded Zelensky to resolve the historical issues now, as, quote, it will cost him less than during the EU accession negotiations. However, sources said this did not reach the president. Quote, the position of Ukrainian politicians on the issue of exhumation of victims of the Volyn tragedy is causing disappointment in Warsaw, so the Polish Foreign Ministry is planning concrete measures, writes the edition. So this is a potential sticking point in relations between Poland and Ukraine, which have been really strong, all things considered, and Poland have been super supportive of Ukraine. It'll be really great to kind of iron this one out so it doesn't become a permanent thorn in the side of the relationship there. Now, defence ministers from 9 Eastern European nations have urged NATO to prepare a collective answer to mounting cases of airspace violations by Russia, according to Bloomberg. Ministers from Bulgaria, Czechia, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania and Slovakia are involved in this. So, for example, Romania urges, quote, robust NATO response to airspace violations by Russia. Romania called on September the 18th for a robust and coordinated response by NATO to these kind of drones violating airspace. Also, you could argue, in Poland's case, missiles too. They just need. What's Hugh Edwards doing there? They need clarity on what will be done, what can be done, what should be done, and it's going to come down to whether NATO are going to advocate for taking out those that ordnance in over NATO airspace, such as Romania, Poland and Latvia. According to Wall Street Journal, Russia has earned $1 billion on the sale of stolen agro products in Ukraine, or stolen from Ukraine, and sold outside. At the same time, Russian traders have not disappeared from international markets and continue to expand their sales, despite the fact that absolutely all buyers, without exception, clearly understand the reasons why grain from Russian sellers has such a favourable price. And like clockwork, Russians in Port Sudan are looking to sign mining deals that will finance the war effort, but more worryingly, further entrench Moscow in the politics and the economics of Sudan for years to come. So Russia is very much involved in the Sahel region of Africa, as that extends through to Sudan. And here they appear to be looking to sign big mining deals concerning gold. This is how they are going to continue to fund their war project, isn't it? So the gold-rich country. It seems that so many countries that are rich in natural resources are also embroiled in dictatorial regimes or non-democratic processes. In fact, I've read papers before to support this in terms of oil. So if you look around the world, there are some anomalies such as the US, UK, Norway, but in general, most rich oil-producing nations or oil-rich nations are associated with a regression from democratic ideals and processes. It's just, power corrupts, doesn't it? Money corrupts. And when you have these natural resources that are concentrated in only so many areas that can be extracted by only so many entities, then you are already condensing power. And then that power gets further distilled through to democratic rulership, or these very rich monarchies in the Middle East often that are not democratic. So yeah, this is a phenomenon. It's not just it seems like that. There are papers on this that you can go and read. Now, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, went on this mission to Russia. It got slagged off. I talked about this the other day, seeing it as pretty inappropriate. They postponed indefinitely their Russian mission after the outrage in Europe. This postponement follows the recent IMF managing director's decision to resume annual economic reviews with Moscow. Good stuff there. Take a long walk off a short pier, guys, if you're going to go and hang out in Russia. Now, Pekka Kaliniemi says Russia is immediately backing up a coup attempt in Armenia after the country has decided to withdraw from the CSTO. So Armenia is looking at bringing themselves out of the CSTO, this kind of NATO sort of agreement within these Eurasian countries and Russia, and it's how they keep their influence operations going in that neck of the woods. Armenia has announced it's foiled a Russian-backed coup. I think they've arrested 7 Armenians, but but doing Russia's bidding inside Armenia. So Armenia, as they move away from the Russian sphere of influence, are going to meet an awful lot of pushback from Russia. And there will be these threats of coups. Look what's happened in Georgia. Are Georgians going to be able to overcome those obstacles in the October elections in Georgia so that they embrace the West, the EU, and democracy? We shall see. But Armenia, that's one to watch at the moment. Now, as you can well imagine, this is hardly surprising, but yet another Robin Brooks set of graphs here. This is Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. These are China's monthly exports to both countries. China now sends almost $5 billion in goods to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan every month, up from $1.5 billion before the invasion. You don't have to be a genius to know these goods are going to Russia. China is Putin's biggest enabler. There'd be no war in Ukraine without China. Absolutely. That I'm sure everyone in the know knows about this. Like, what can be done about it? Obviously, something needs to be done about it. Now, I'm just going to give you a thread on good old Budanov and his very deadpan face. This is from Joni Ascola, who is a Finnish PhD candidate trying to help Ukraine with mocking disinformation. So, okay, he says Imperial Russia is racing against time in Ukraine. Budanov's recent remarks reveal a degree of realistic optimism. So, Budanov recently participated in the 20th annual that's a Yalta Europe Strategy Conference, and conducted an interview, both of which featured intriguing insights regarding the war and Russia's situation. Budanov expressed significant concern over North Korean supplies to Russia, asserting that North Korea is by far the largest military supplier. The volumes provided by North Korea are unparalleled. There are claims, 13,000 plus cargo containers have gone with presumably ammunition, stacked full of ammunition from North Korea to Russia. Budanov believes that Russia intends to wrap up the war by the end of 2025 or early 26, aiming for a victory. He notes that Russia will encounter considerable economic difficulties beginning in the summer of 2025. And this is why you see why they're so intent on doing these deals in Africa, to gain them a quick buck. They need that money to sustain the war. Quote, if Russia fails to achieve victory by that time, it will forfeit its long-term goal of being viewed as a superpower over the next 30 years, he stated, citing Russian intelligence sources. Russia expects, quote, all their problems will begin in the... he expects that for Russia, all their problems will begin in summer of 2025 as financial, economic and socio-political factors converge. Although it is managing the worsening situation, Russia acknowledges that the already severe economic situation is deepening. So maybe Russia expecting that themselves. The summer of 2025 is anticipated to be a challenging time for Russia, prompting the country to expedite various processes to lessen these impacts and manage the crisis, with the goal of concluding the war on favourable terms. Russia is increasingly challenged by inadequate army recruitment. Quote, by the end of summer 2025, they will face a crucial decision: announce another mobilization or scale back hostilities, both of which could significantly impact their military strategy. Now, we heard the other day that they are increasing the size of their army by decree by 180,000 personnel. That could well be a precursor, as Joe Blogg said on his video the other day, to a general mobilization. It's what they did last time, so we could expect that soon, but that presents them a dilemma, as well we know. Budanov also states that the war fatigue in Russia is gradually becoming evident, as the conflict has already affected a substantial portion of the Russian population. Russia's severe labour shortage, coupled with rising public spending and sanctions, has resulted in high inflation and a 19% key interest rate, both of which will significantly harm the economy and reduce investments. Russia's key interest rate was at only 7.5% in June 2023, so going through the roof. As stated by Budanov, recruitment is becoming increasingly difficult for Russia, which must continue raising salaries and signing bonuses to attract enough personnel for its war efforts. A new mobilization might be needed in the future. Russia has been losing equipment faster than it can produce it during the war, although its vast Soviet-era stocks have helped. These will run out in the next 1 to 2 years, forcing Russia to buy more abroad and scale back operations. All of this clarifies why Putin is so determined to push forward on the Eastern Front at any cost. Ukraine must endure this period as neither side is prepared to negotiate, and Russia's situation is expected to deteriorate after 2025. Budanov's statement, this is why, by the way, this war is not just a conventional war. This is a war, yes, in information spaces, in cyberspaces, but it's an economic war. It's a trade war. It's a financial war. It's a political war where we are trying to influence China not to do what it's doing. When we are trying to influence through secondary sanctions, through Chinese burns, or whatever it is, we are trying to influence certain nations not to do what they're doing. We want Brazil on side, but they're not playing ball, etc., etc. What is going on in all these nations? It is such a multifaceted enterprises, and is why I have said that we are in World War III. We're just actively involved in all of these things. Other than sending our own troops to the front line, we are involved in every other part of this war. Budanov's statement confirms that Russia is running out of time and cannot sustain a war in the long term. Currently, Russia is attempting to establish facts on the ground, but the Ukrainian defense is proving to be much more capable than Moscow had anticipated. Additionally, the Kursk operation has significantly worsened the situation for Russia more than many realize. It shattered the belief among many in Russia that the country is a superpower and demonstrated that Ukraine can still make advances despite its limited resources. Interesting thread there. So thank you for humouring me with that. Okay. Now, we heard about the issue at the Venice Film Festival and the Toronto International Film Festival where they did, they eventually have, I think, pulled out. Have they? No, they screened the film, but loads of other, like the agents, I think, for the film, this Russian film, pulled out. Anyway, there's loads of controversy over that documentary film that really was Russian propaganda dressed up as a kind of independent documentary. One of the greatest actresses of all time, Cate Blanchett, says UCC Toronto, presented her own movie about Ukraine. The movie is about living and surviving in Kharkiv. You can watch Ukraine Life Under Attack on Amazon Video or Apple TV. Interesting. Thank you, Cate Blanchett. And there she is, dressed very fetchingly in the blue and yellow of Ukraine to indicate where her sympathies lie. Good stuff there. Right, we're going to move on to US politics and how it is interacting with Ukraine. So Ivana Stradner, the Balkans expert here, says Moscow celebrates this article. So the article in question is the Hill article written by Donald Trump Jr. and RFK Jr. that I did a reaction video to, and it was terrible. Like, these two had an absolutely shocking understanding of the war in Ukraine and a really naive approach to how to solve it. Their approach to solving it is giving Russia everything they want, essentially. So that article in The Hill is called Negotiate with Moscow to End the Ukraine War and Prevent Nuclear Devastation. Now, you can go and read that. I advise you to just get a stress ball in your hand when you do. So Ivana Stradner says Moscow celebrates this article. So they're holding it up as like, yeah, of course they do, because it's freaking Russian appeasement. Yeah, Putin is a KGB guy who loves to exploit vulnerabilities in his opponents. This is a perfect example of how Moscow's deception works. And you can go to the Kyiv Independent to see a bunch of, 5 prominent Ukrainians responding to Trump Jr. and RFK Jr.'s Negotiate with Russia op-ed. And they excoriate. It is obviously, it's not a good read for these people. It's not a good read for anyone who has a sound grasp of rational argument. Here's an example from one person, from Professor Haran, saying, frankly speaking, it seems that the authors do not understand the reasons for the war and Russia's aims. They are only repeating Russian lies. Escalation from the side of the West? Come on. The authors pretend they do not know the facts. In 1994, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world, in exchange for territorial guarantees provided by the UK, the US, and Russia. In 2010, Ukraine officially declared itself to be neutral until So the idea that Ukraine should become neutral. They were neutral and then they were invaded. Until 2014, Ukrainians were strongly against joining NATO, and nevertheless, Russia attacked Ukraine in 2014. Putin is openly saying there is no separate Ukrainian state. Ukraine should be a part of the great Russian people. He's annexing Ukrainian territory. The former Russian Empire is trying to come back, etc., etc., etc. Just like they do not have a good grasp of what is going on here. Are we supposed to believe, as Donald Trump Jr. and RFK Jr. do, says someone else, apparently do that Putin is willing to end all life on Earth over a strike on a strategic stockpile, but only if the munition that delivers it was made in a Western factory. And, you can talk about it. They mentioned the Toropet strike and that not causing any red line to have been crossed. Some have said that all that burning in Toropets was the burning of red lines, which I think is great. Kennedy and Trump Jr. are wrong. Complacency with Russia's nuclear blackmail doesn't reduce the risk of escalation for the US and the world. It increases it. Yielding to Russia's threats emboldens Moscow and conveys that whatever Russia does, the US can't stop them, says Natalia Shapoval. And Timothy Milovanov. RFK and Donald Trump Jr. said the US should surrender Ukraine to avoid nuclear war, giving Russia a rhetorical victory after its failure to secure one on the battlefield. This defeatist stance disregards centuries of American courage and leadership in defending freedom. Their argument reinforces two Russian propaganda narratives. First, it frames Russia's invasion as a response to NATO, ignoring Ukraine's sovereignty. I've always said that. Second, it portrays Russia's lack of action against Ukraine's successes and Western support not as a sign of weakness or bluff, but as calculated strategic restraint. Etc., etc. And here Daniel Lubkivsky says, despite the famous names of the authors of this op-ed, it looks like a weak attempt to engage the US into direct talks with Russia on Russia's terms. In my opinion, this is a classic case of myopia when completely narrow political interests prevail over strategic thinking, and it's clear in this message. From my perspective, both the key idea and the arguments they are leading are misleading, etc., etc., etc. I mean, yes, good stuff. Completely wrong those two were for writing it, and completely wrong in their argumentation and their application of rationality, which ends up being an application of irrationality. Then we go to good old
Ukraine wants this war to end.
JD Vance. Let's just remind you what JD Vance said in an interview.
Europe, which, by the way, has underfunded this war while American taxpayers have been very generous to the Ukrainians, the Europeans want this war to end because it's jacking up their energy prices. So I think what this looks like is Trump sits down, he says to the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Europeans, you guys need to figure out what does a peaceful settlement look like. And what it probably looks like is something like the current line of demarcation between Russia and Ukraine. That becomes like a demilitarized zone. It's
freezing the front line as it stands, so Russia gets to keep everything that they've stolen.
Heavily fortified so the Russians don't invade again. Ukraine remains its independent sovereignty. Russia gets the guarantee of neutrality.
So although Ukraine has its independent sovereignty, we get to dictate that it remains neutral and it can't join NATO.
Ukraine, it doesn't join NATO, it doesn't.
So that's not sovereignty. We are dictating to Ukraine. We are taking its agency away.
Join, some of these sort of allied institutions. And I think that's ultimately what this looks like.
So by allied institutions, the only thing you can mean is the EU. So they can't join the EU, they can't join NATO, which means that Russia can then go back and attack them again. Okay, I've already told you that. Here's Ilya Ponomarenko, the former Kyiv Independent journalist and author, saying, I have bad news. This is not a plan. This is not even a concept of a plan. Ouch. This is demagoguery that tries to pretend that there's a cakewalk, one-step solution to complicated problems like the largest European war of aggression since 1945 by a revanchist dictatorial regime entirely focused on erasing a neighbouring nation and on a war and confrontation with the West as a cornerstone of its power. To start with, rumours have it that Ukrainians and Europeans don't just make peace with Russia, but not because they had no idea before JD Vance told them, but because Vladimir Putin's understanding of peace is nothing but the capitulation and the death of Ukraine as a nation. The Russian occupation and Russian armies coming to the border of Central Europe with NATO and the West totally bowing down to Vladimir Putin's will. Absolutely. I mean, he's on point so much in this. That's why I'm reading it to you. Does that sound like peace one should accept ASAP? Regarding this heavily fortified demilitarized zone along the current line of contact stretching throughout Ukraine, who said Russia would be fine with freezing the line as it is without having Ukraine's Kherson, Zaporizhia and the rest of Donbass, that is enshrined in its own constitution, as its national territory? Who told you that satisfying Putin's demands of keeping Ukraine out of NATO and all other allied institutions like the EU would satisfy him and close the issue forever now? Did the previous 20 years of keeping Ukraine out of NATO per Russian demands prevent a major Russian invasion, or did they only make it inevitable because you bowed down and made them the things easier for Putin against Ukraine? In other words, all of this is exactly what Putin wants. Who said these things? Putin said these things. And not joining NATO is what facilitated this war. Had they been allowed to join NATO previously, this war wouldn't have happened because Article 5 would have stopped that from happening. If you want Europeans to finally start paying the bill on arming Ukraine, which is a weird allegation as well, given the amount of European defence aid, he's statistically incorrect in his implications there, and make Ukraine behind the demilitarized zone too strong to be invaded by Russia again. Who told you that would be acceptable to Russia? A heavily militarized, strong, sovereign and independent westernized Ukraine in control of 80% of its territory. Who told you that Kremlin would agree to this? If Ukraine's purely hypothetical membership of NATO, which is never going to happen, was used as a casus belli, a cause for this war. Who told you that Kremlin would be fine with Ukraine staying out of NATO but super armed to the teeth to prevent another invasion? Maybe it's because this war was never about NATO or anything like that, but about exterminating Ukraine as a nation in any form, and thus keeping it out of history's most successful defensive alliance that now keeps the Baltic states safe, unlike neutral Ukraine. Who told you that the Kremlin would give the West time to arm Ukraine to prevent another war? Who told you that the Kremlin would not demand that all Western weapons be withdrawn from Ukraine and that Ukraine shrink its army into nothing, just like someone's beloved Istanbul agreements were saying? Who told you that the Kremlin would not want to veto all Western defence aid and all assistance in case of invasion, just like someone's beloved Istanbul agreements were saying? Who said that Vladimir Putin, in another case, would not just say, "Thank you very, very much, you idiots," and take a pause in hostilities to fix his problems, recoup his losses, and attack Ukraine again in a much better shape before too long? Who said that Vladimir Putin, who made this war the central idea of this dictatorial regime, would even want to enter negotiations of peace, knowing that the potential next US administration is ready to give him anything he wants for the sake of the false illusion of peacemaking that would later lead to catastrophic consequences? Who would want to invest in the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine in this case? Who would want to give any guarantees knowing that Ukraine is locked up in a grey zone, knowing that Vladimir Putin may announce that Nazi Ukraine and its Western masters violate his peace agreement despite his persistent peace efforts, and therefore it unfortunately needs to be eradicated in yet another special military operation? Like I said, that is not a plan. That is deeply unserious. Boom, drop mic, JD Vance, go and just sod off. Just sod off. You are not helping Ukraine, and you only have the best interests of Putin at heart. That is what it has appeared over time, and that's what it appears to be now. And indeed, it gets worse. That same interview, I'd missed this one.
The leader, I forget exactly which official it was within the European Union, but sent Elon this threatening letter that basically said, we're going to arrest you if you platform Donald Trump, who, by the way, is the likely next president of the United States. So what America should be saying is, oh, if NATO wants us to continue supporting them, and NATO wants us to continue to be a good participant in this military alliance, why don't you respect American values and respect free speech? Excuse me, it's insane that we would support a military alliance if that military alliance isn't going to be pro-free speech. I think we can do both, but we've got to say American power.
He's confusing NATO with the EU for a start. I mean, irrespective of his interpretation of what Joseph Borrell said in that letter, and that's a whole different story of misrepresentation, but he's smashing together the EU and NATO.
Comes with certain strings attached. One of those is respect free speech, especially in our European allies. Like, look, I'm not going to go to some backwoods country and tell them how to live their lives, but European countries should theoretically share American values, especially about some very basic.
I'm not going to go to backward countries and tell them how to live their lives, but I am going to do that to Europe. Just by the way, I am going to do that to Europe. I expect them to do exactly what we want them to do. I expect them to be fully aligned to everything about us. And if Trump and Elon Musk want to do X, Y, and Z, then Europeans should be fully in support of that. Yibbity yabba, folks.
European countries should theoretically share American values, especially about some very basic things like free speech. The leader.
So JD Vance says that the United States support for NATO should be contingent on Europe's support for Elon Musk and Twitter. Just blows my mind. Interesting that Elon Musk is back in the hot seat for sharing anti-Ukrainian content generated by a Russian PSYOPs team. So those memes that he has shared, like I reported the other day, he's also not making a lot of money. I do talk about that in my US video that's coming out later today, whereby actually I don't think this is a Mark Cuban thing where he's just the richest man in the world, having done a deal with Donald Trump, who could be the most powerful man in the world, is intoxicating in its power. So Elon Musk isn't so interested in selling electric vehicles and having Twitter make money. He has done a deal with Donald Trump where he gets to platform Trump's campaign and platform Trump in exchange for having Trump's ear and in being in the most important position in the world, basically in the Oval Office, more often than not. The richest man in the world becomes entwined with the most powerful man in the world, so that Musk becomes the most powerful man in the world. It is deeply, deeply worrying. Now, Microsoft has observed a notable shift in Russian influence operations tactics, reflecting the changing US political environment. Specifically, we have observed Russia pivot towards targeting the Harris-Walz campaign, with actors disseminating fabricated videos designed to sow discord and spread disinformation about the new Democratic nominee, Vice President Harris. So that's coming from Microsoft, looking at data there. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom, who's been on a... he gets absolutely slammed by Elon Musk on a daily basis. He's a California governor. California is the 5th biggest economy in the world. So this is like one of the biggest country leaders in the world, Gavin Newsom. People underestimate what it means to be the governor of California. But he said, I just signed a bill to make this illegal in the state of California. You can no longer knowingly distribute an ad or other election communications that contain material deceptive content, including deepfakes. So this is what happened when Elon Musk shared a voice or in an ad, basically a deep fake ad. I think it's deep fake of Kamala Harris. Manipulating a voice in an ad like this one should be illegal. I'll be signing a bill in a matter of weeks to make sure that it is. So he did that. So Elon Musk retweets altered Kamala Harris campaign ad. So he's manipulated it, sent it out, and if you don't know, you think that's... I mean, there needs to be something done, by the way. Regulation needs to be done across the board about deepfakes, about what we do. Again, it's this information war that we're involved in all over the shop, with each other, as much as, with algorithms and with state actors and non-state actors and corporations and individual people like Elon Musk. We're involved in, it's just chaos at the moment. And you have this situation where the epistemic crisis, the kind of knowledge crisis that we have, it extends to videos and audio of people that you think with AI now, you can change people's... you can create a video of Donald Trump or Kamala Harris so that they can be doing things that will insinuate them terribly. And it's made up of whole cloth, or it's altered from the original in ways that you just don't know. We are going to go through a period over the next few years where we won't know whether what we see is true or not. You can see clips on the news and you'll be questioning whether that is a deepfake or not. And even when it is real, you'll have people that won't believe real stuff because they'll just say, oh, I'm not believing that's happened. So say someone does something terrible. John Smith, your favourite political, because I don't want to use any real person. John Smith is your favourite your favourite politician. You want John Smith to win the election. And then you see a video of John Smith, and it's a real video of John Smith doing something that should invalidate him from running, right? And it's like a terrible thing. And you're like, oh, that's deep faked. So it's not only fake videos coming through messes around with what you understand is true or not, but it gives you ammunition to doubt real things as well. And so we'll just be in this period of complete chaos as to what is real and what isn't. And when you've got frickin' Elon Musk, the richest man and arguably one of the most powerful men in the world, willfully, knowingly spreading deep fake disinformation, that is freaking dangerous. And this is what part of the reason why I totally dislike this human being. He has no grasp on, like, I shared one of an AI one of Trump the other day dressed like a goth, right? And that's obviously not, like his speech got turned into like him speaking with like a goth hairstyle and black lipstick and everything, right? That is when there's obvious humor there. And I shared it not because of actually the content. I shared that because wow, look what you can do now like that. Think about if you're trying to seriously like mess around with people. Like this is an obvious fake, and it's quite limited in its believability. My point wasn't about poking fun of Donald Trump. Actually, that would have been of any serious politician made to look like an emo or something. But it's where it goes into we really don't know what's true and what's not. It's just dangerous. For example, false claim that VP Harris was involved in the June 2011 hit and run incident that left a 13-year-old girl paralyzed was created by a Russian troll farm, according to a report released by Microsoft. So here's one of the examples that Microsoft gives, the real world example of that is out there, and I've seen this repeated concerning this car crash that she was in, and she did a hit and run, and it's just not true, and that's come from Russia. So just be warned. Now, just YouTube has removed the channels of Belarusian propagandists as part of its sanctions, or the sanctions, imposed on some company there. So you've got all these sanctions that have come into place on the 12th of September from the US, whereby they're having to close down RT and other subsidiaries and other Russian propaganda outlets from being accessible through YouTube and Facebook and so on and so forth. It looks like YouTube is also clamping down on Belarusian propagandists there. Interesting, due to sanctions. Now, leaked Russian documents reveal that Russian, and these are the ones I talked about previously. I need to go through that V-Square article about this, where we got 2,800 influencers that have been listed on these documents. Leaked Russian documents reveal that Russian IT group, the Social Design Agency, explicitly identified Marjorie Taylor Greene as aiding their efforts to spread misinformation about Ukraine. The next 2 months are going to be flooded with lies and manipulation. Please think critically before sharing content on social media. It's more important than ever to verify before amplifying misinformation. Really good point here from Brian Krasenstein here. We all need to be really, really careful. Just be careful what you believe. If something sounds suspiciously like that's a smoking gun that would ruin someone's campaign, then just question whether that's definitely the case, or anything really, from the smallest to the biggest claim. Just be extra careful at the moment in these volatile times we live. Right. I don't know if you guys know, I kind of reported it, but Zelensky's been asked to come up with a victory plan and provide that to the US before they potentially give permission to Ukraine to strike deep into Russia. That might well happen at the UN summit that is upcoming. So all points for Ukraine's victory plan, says the Kyiv Independent, that Kyiv aims to present to Washington have been worked out, according to Zelensky in his evening address from last night. Quote, the most important thing now is a determination to implement it, the president said. There isn't and cannot be any alternative to peace, no freezing of the war, or any other manipulations that will simply postpone Russian aggression at a later stage. Now, the US ambassador to UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, stated that Washington has seen Ukraine's victory plan, Zelensky's victory plan. She mentioned that the US believes Zelensky's plan outlines a strategy that could be effective. So it's looking like the victory plan is at least plausible, at least half decent. President Zelensky will speak at the meeting of the UN Security Council next week. Ukraine's leader will address the permanent members next Tuesday. Cue furious disinformation campaigns to start in Moscow and repeated by useful or paid idiots in the USA and elsewhere, says Tim White. Now, Donald Trump has admitted that he will meet with Zelensky during the visit next week to the US. According to Reuters, the candidate from the Democrats, Kamala Harris, also intends to hold a meeting with the president of Ukraine. According to Bloomberg, Zelensky is going to present a plan of victory in the war against Russia to all his interlocutors. Really important there. So also meeting Kamala Harris. The impending meeting comes less than 50 days before the US presidential election, a race defined by dramatic upheavals and sharply contrasting views on Ukraine. Now, interestingly, at the moment, the polls are very much trending towards Kamala Harris. More and more polls coming out. We've had MRP polls, which are very granular, and they are looking good. We've had the Quinnipiac polls coming out with Harris up 5 and 6% in Michigan and Pennsylvania, only 1% though in Wisconsin, interestingly. Other good-looking polls. People are going to wait for the next Time Siena poll, which is a post-debate poll. Time Siena usually skew a little bit to the Republicans, so it's going to be interesting to see whether, if that puts her in the lead there, then that really is looking good. Some of these have been above the margin of error, so all of it's looking good. But then you have, are the polls correct? Because when 2016 and 2020 and 2022, they were wrong in different ways. So sometimes they're wrong in favor of the Democrats and sometimes in favor of the Republicans. And so the big question now is, have they learnt at all? Are these polls correct? They are starting to trend more consistently in favor of Kamala Harris. Can she sustain that? She needs to be on TV way more and keep, because the statistics are showing, and I talk about this in my video, like this is empirically true. Her favorability ratings have gone from, in June, -14 to +1. So you've had a +15 favorability rating upward move, and that will be among independents and people who just don't know her. So the more she is on TV, the more of a bounce she gets. So the DNC, she got a bounce. The debate, she got a bounce. She's now starting to do interviews. The more she gets on TV, the better it will be for her. So if you're looking at Ukraine, and if you think the best options for Ukraine are her winning, things are looking quite good at the moment, but there's a long time. There's going to be October surprises. Can she keep in the public eye? Will there be another debate, etc., etc., etc.? Okay, now the last thing to say is there is, and I saw some stuff from this guy. So an American YouTuber has been mocked online after being caught lying that he visited the front line. So this is a guy that went out to Ukraine. He went to Kiev to try and show that American tax dollars were being spent poorly. So he went to Kiev and tried to find like expensive cars and say, look, the money's being spent badly. And then people are like, dude, what are you doing? And like, how about go to the front lines? You're in Kiev where you're being safe because American tax dollars are being spent on Patriot air defense systems that are protecting your ass. So how about you go to the front line? And then he was like, yeah, all right. And then he said, look, I've been to the front line, and he shows an image of a trench that apparently is like 10 hours drive away from the front line. It's like, it might even be in the Kiev Oblast. Go to the front lines if you want anyone to take you serious, or you can keep grifting. And then he then replies with that, and then that's not the front line position, but nice try, you're an idiot, you're definitely an idiot, oh blah 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 blah. But then in the background of the pitch, you've got some girl hiding by the tree, and it's like, some front line it must have been, please do better. It's like, I'm in the front line with the trenches, and it's just like, really? And then this article just absolutely excoriates him and says, look, you can go to countries in the middle of war and find people living well who aren't involved in fighting on the war, such as, look at this French woman in 1940s Paris, right? In the middle of the war, this is what happens. Like, don't go to Kiev, one of the safest places, precisely because of US taxpayers' money. And then find all the people who are living safely. Look, I'm in a restaurant and people are eating. Therefore, this is the people's US tax dollars being spent on your nice meal. It's just like, seriously. Anyway, it's great to see this article come out and absolutely destroy this guy, this muppet. So he is a pro. Supposedly a pro Trump fan who posts heavily edited interviews and clickbait disinformation on social media. Ridiculed for rubbish work. Anyway, thanks guys. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.